Imagine you spent your entire life believing that the people at the top, the billionaires, the geniuses, the ones everyone calls naturally gifted, got there because they were simply born different, born smarter, born luckier, born with something you just don't have. Imagine carrying that quiet, heavy belief with you for years, letting it slowly convince you that certain doors were never meant for you. Now imagine finding out that almost everything you believed about success was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Fundamentally, completely, beautifully wrong. That's what this book does to you. It doesn't just change how you see successful people. It changes how you see yourself. Welcome back. If you're new here, this channel is where we sit down together and walk through some of the most powerful books ever written. Not in a rushed, surface-level way, but slowly, deeply, the way a book like this deserves. Today we're talking about Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And I want you to stay with me through this entire journey because the idea that Gladwell plants in your mind by the end of this book is one of those rare ideas that you genuinely cannot unsee once you've seen it. If this kind of storytelling resonates with you, take a second and subscribe. It really does help, and I promise every video is worth your time. So let's start at the very beginning, with a question that Gladwell opens the book with. A question so simple, it almost feels stupid. Why do some people succeed, and others don't? We've all asked it. We've all watched someone rise to the top and quietly wondered what they have that we don't. And the answer most of us settle on is talent, hard work, maybe a little luck. We build these clean, comfortable stories about self-made people, the lone genius who figured it out alone, the entrepreneur who willed a company into existence, the athlete who was just born with it. But Gladwell is about to rip that story apart, piece by piece, with evidence so clear and examples so vivid that you'll wonder why no one ever said this out loud before. He starts in a small town in Canada, inside a hockey rink, watching children play. And here's where it gets interesting. Someone noticed something strange about the players on elite Canadian hockey teams. When you looked at their birthdays, just their birthdays, nothing else, there was a pattern so obvious, so consistent, that it was almost impossible to explain. The majority of the best players, the ones selected for elite programs, the ones who became professionals, were born in January, February, and March. Not July, not October. January, February, March. Over and over again. Why? This is the Matthew effect, and it's one of the most quietly devastating ideas in this entire book. In Canada, the cutoff date for youth hockey age groups is January 1st. So a child born in January is competing against children who might be born in December of the same year, nearly a full year younger. At age 8 or 9, a year of development is enormous. The January child is bigger, faster, more coordinated. Coaches see that and they call it talent. They put that child in the better programs, give them better coaching, more practice time, more games. The December child gets left behind, labeled as less promising. But it was never talent. It was a birthday. And once that small initial advantage snowballs, better training, more confidence, more opportunity, it compounds over years into something that looks exactly like natural greatness. The rich get richer. The head start creates the gap. And the gap creates the legend. And this isn't just hockey. Gladwell finds this pattern in European soccer, in American baseball, in academic programs, in gifted classrooms. Children born just after the cutoff date for school enrollment are consistently more likely to be diagnosed with learning disabilities, less likely to be selected for gifted programs, less likely to eventually earn advanced degrees. Not because they're less intelligent, because they were younger when the comparison was made, and that small difference got frozen in time, mistaken for something permanent and real. Think about that. Think about how many brilliant people were told early on that they weren't exceptional. Not because they weren't, but because the calendar worked against them. Think about how many potential outliers were quietly filtered out of the system before they ever got a real chance. Now here's where Gladwell goes even deeper, and this is where the book starts to feel almost uncomfortable, because it forces you to look at the people you admire most and ask a harder question. We talk about the 10,000-hour rule like it's a motivational poster now. Just practice for 10,000 hours and you'll be world-class. But Gladwell's original point is more specific and more unsettling than that. It's not just that practice matters. It's that the people who achieved greatness almost always had unusual, extraordinary access to practice that the rest of their peers simply didn't have. It wasn't just that they worked harder. They had an open door that others didn't, and they walked through it at exactly the right time. The Beatles. You know them. Everyone knows them. But do you know what made them the Beatles? Most people point to their raw musical talent, their chemistry, their genius, and those things mattered. But Gladwell traces something else. Before they were famous, before they had a single hit record, the Beatles spent years playing in Hamburg, Germany. Not 1 or 2 shows, not a weekend gig. They played 8 hours a night, 7 nights a week, for months at a time, across multiple trips. By the time they exploded onto the world stage in 1964, they had performed live together an estimated 1,200 times. Most bands never reached that number in their entire career. The music they made looked like genius, but underneath it was 10,000 hours of relentless, demanding, real-world practice that would have been impossible to get in England. Hamburg was the door. They were lucky enough to walk through it. And then there's Bill Gates. And this story, this particular story, is maybe the most important one Gladwell tells, because Gates is the ultimate self-made icon, the ultimate symbol of pure individual genius. In 1968, Bill Gates was a 13-year-old student at a private school in Seattle called Lakeside. That year, the school formed a computer club. Now you have to understand what 1968 means. This is before personal computers exist, before the internet, before any of this is remotely normal or accessible. Most universities didn't have computers that students could interact with in real time, but Lakeside did. And not only that, through a series of extraordinary coincidences involving a Mother's Club fundraiser, a nearby university, and a small startup company that needed testers, Bill Gates had access to a time-sharing terminal where he could program to his heart's content, for free, at all hours of the night. By the time he dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft, he had been programming intensively for roughly 10 years. He had his 10,000 hours before most people his age had even touched a computer. Was he brilliant? Absolutely. But brilliance plus 10,000 hours of opportunity that almost no one else on Earth had at that age? That's a different conversation entirely. And this is what most people never realize. Gladwell isn't saying these people didn't work hard or weren't talented. He is absolutely not saying that. What he's saying is that we've been telling an incomplete story. We edit out the lucky breaks, the timing, the open doors, the specific cultural and historical moments that made certain kinds of success possible. We take the finished painting and say, "What a genius," without ever asking who gave them the brushes, who paid for the canvas, who built the studio and turned on the light. And when we do that, we don't just misunderstand success. We make it feel more like fate than possibility. There's a chapter in this book that I find almost haunting, and it's about a man named Chris Langan. You've probably never heard of him. His IQ has been measured at somewhere between 195 and 210, possibly the highest ever recorded. He taught himself to read at 3 years old. He learned advanced mathematics on his own. He absorbed physics, philosophy, and multiple languages without formal education. And today, Chris Langan is largely unknown, working odd jobs, never having fulfilled the extraordinary potential that anyone who met him as a child would have predicted. Why? What went wrong? How does the smartest person in the room end up nowhere? And more importantly, what does his life tell us about how success actually works? Gladwell contrasts Langan with Robert Oppenheimer, the physicist who led the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer was brilliant, yes, but not necessarily smarter than Langan by any meaningful measure. What Oppenheimer had, that Langan didn't, was what the sociologist Annette Lareau calls concerted cultivation, He grew up in a family that taught him how to talk to authority figures, how to negotiate, how to ask for what he needed and push back when he was being treated unfairly. When Oppenheimer was a student at Cambridge and tried to poison his tutor, a genuinely disturbing incident, he somehow talked his way out of expulsion through sheer persuasive confidence. Langan, raised in poverty and chaos, never learned those social skills. When the university made an administrative error with his financial aid, he didn't know how to navigate it. He left. His potential calcified around a system that never gave him the tools to move through it. Intelligence was never the difference. The world they were given to navigate was. This leads Gladwell to one of his most important observations, that IQ, beyond a certain threshold, stops predicting success in any meaningful way. Once you're smart enough, roughly an IQ of around 120, additional intelligence doesn't consistently produce better outcomes. What starts to matter more is emotional intelligence, social fluency, the ability to read a room, to sell an idea, to persist through rejection, to know when to push and when to wait. These things are learned. They come from your upbringing, your community, your culture, the environment you were raised in. And that means they can be taught. Which means the story is even less about what you're born with than we imagined. But here's where everything changes, and I want you to really sit with this part. Gladwell starts looking at cultural legacies, not just what we learn as individuals, but the deep, invisible patterns that entire cultures carry across generations, shaping behavior in ways that people inside those cultures can't even fully see. He looks at why students from certain East Asian cultures consistently outperform the global average in mathematics. The easy answer, the lazy answer, is that they're inherently better at it. But Gladwell peels that back and finds something far more interesting. Rice farming. In much of Asia, rice cultivation was, for thousands of years, extraordinarily labor-intensive in a way that wheat farming in Europe simply wasn't. A rice paddy requires constant, meticulous, skillful tending. It can't be left alone. It rewards attention to detail. It punishes carelessness. And the returns you get from the field are almost perfectly proportional to the effort you invest. More care, more yield. Less care, less yield. Wheat farming, by contrast, was largely dependent on soil conditions and weather, factors largely outside your control. The cultures that grew up around these different agricultural systems developed different intuitions about the relationship between effort and reward. In rice farming cultures, the belief that hard work is always meaningful, that patience and precision pay off, that there are no shortcuts. These weren't motivational slogans. They were lessons encoded into generations of lived experience. And that belief, that cultural inheritance, shows up in how children from those cultures approach a difficult math problem. They don't give up as quickly, they sit with it longer. They believe the answer is findable if they keep trying. That's not an IQ difference, that's a legacy. Take a second to let that sink in. The way your ancestors farmed the land, possibly thousands of years ago, might still be shaping how you approach a hard problem today. The things we think of as personal character traits, persistence, patience, attention to detail, might actually be cultural technologies, passed down invisibly through language and habit and expectation. That idea alone could fill a dozen books. But Gladwell uses it to make a very specific point, that when we look at any successful person or any successful group and try to explain their success, we are almost always looking too close. We're looking at the individual when we should be looking at the world they came from. He explores this even further in one of the most gripping chapters of the book, where he analyzes the crash records of Korean Air in the late 1990s. Korean Air had one of the worst safety records in commercial aviation for a period of time. Planes were going down at an alarming rate, and investigators eventually traced part of the problem to a cultural pattern embedded in how Korean cockpit crews communicated. Korean culture has an extraordinarily strong emphasis on hierarchy and deference to authority. Junior officers were deeply reluctant to directly challenge or correct a senior pilot, even when they could see the pilot was making a dangerous mistake. They would hint. They would soften. They would use language that left the concern buried under layers of politeness. And sometimes, pilots missed the message, and planes fell. The fix wasn't hiring different pilots. It was understanding that a cultural legacy, a beautiful, deeply human instinct toward respect and harmony, had a lethal blind spot in a specific high-stakes environment, and then systematically training crews to communicate differently in that context. And Korean Air turned its safety record around completely. The problem was never the people. It was the invisible system shaping their behavior. This is the thread that runs through every page of this book. Outliers are not outliers because they escaped the influence of their world. They are outliers because their world happened to give them something extraordinary at exactly the right moment, and they were prepared and fortunate enough to receive it. The question Gladwell is quietly asking, in every chapter, is not, how do we find the next great genius? The question is, how much genius are we wasting right now because we're not building the right worlds for the right people? Think about that question. Think about how many kids, right now, somewhere, are being raised in circumstances that will never give them an open door, never give them 10,000 hours of the right kind of practice, never give them the language to walk into a room and ask for what they deserve. Think about how many potential outliers are living and dying in obscurity, not because they lack the raw material, but because the system around them never made space for what they could have been. That question should make you feel something. It should make you feel a little angry, a little sad, and hopefully, a little responsible. I'd love to know, in the comments below, if you think about your own life through this lens. Was there a door that opened for you at exactly the right time? Was there one that closed? Because Gladwell ends this book with his own story, and it's quietly beautiful. He traces his own success, as a writer, as a thinker, as someone who got to write books that millions of people read, back through generations of his own family. To his mother, a Jamaican woman of extraordinary intelligence who, because of the specific racial and economic circumstances of her birth, could have easily lived an unseen life. To his grandmother, to the particular mixture of timing and geography and education and culture that eventually produced the conditions in which Malcolm Gladwell could write. He doesn't tell this story to diminish his own achievement. He tells it to say, I know what I was given. I know the doors that happened to open. And I don't think it's honest or kind or useful to pretend I got here alone. That's the emotional core of this entire book. It's not a cynical argument that effort doesn't matter or that talent is a myth. It's a plea for honesty, a plea for humility, a plea to stop building stories around individuals that erase the world that shaped them. Because when we erase the world, we also erase the lesson. We stop asking how to build better worlds. We just shrug and say some people are special and move on. And when we do that, we lose everyone who could have been special if only we'd built the room differently. The next time you look at someone at the top, someone successful, someone celebrated, someone called a genius or a prodigy or a self-made anything, try to look a little wider. Try to see the specific year they were born, the access they had, the culture that shaped their instincts, the door that opened at exactly the right time, the community that held them up even when they didn't ask it to. And then look at yourself the same way. Not to excuse yourself from effort, because effort still matters profoundly, but to understand that you are not just you. You are everything that made you. And that story is far longer, far stranger, and far more powerful than the one you've been telling yourself. We spend so much time asking why certain people made it. Maybe the better question, the kinder, harder, more important question, is why so many didn't, and what we're going to do about it. Because if Gladwell is right, and I believe he is, success isn't a mystery that belongs to the exceptional few. It's a design problem, and design problems have solutions. We just have to care enough to look for them. That thought, that one quiet, radical thought, is worth more than 1,000 motivational speeches. And it started with a simple question about birthdays on a hockey rink in Canada.